Donald Trump has announced 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports into the US from March 12th. Are allies like Canada, South Korea, Japan and the EU his targets? Or does Washington have a very different target in mind? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Joining us today are Alexander Huang, Council on Strategic Wargaming Studies Chair and Kuomintang International Affairs Director, and Stephen Tan, International Policy Advisory Group Managing Director. Very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. Steel and aluminium are used to build everything from apartment buildings and ships to washing machines and cars. China dominates this global steel and aluminium industry, producing more than 1 billion tons of steel a year. In both metals, it produces as much as or more than the rest of the world combined. And yet, when it comes to the US steel market, the biggest exporters are Canada, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea and Vietnam. Japan is the 6th exporter and Taiwan the 8th. After a series of tariffs imposed over the past 8 years from Trump's first term and Joe Biden's term, China dropped from the top to now the 10th biggest exporter into the US market. However, if you look at China's own iron and steel exports to main destinations, they are South Korea and Vietnam, followed by Thailand, Indonesia and Turkey. The picture is a little different when you look at aluminium. The top exporters to the US are Canada, China, Mexico, United Arab Emirates and South Korea. Now, looking at China's main destinations for aluminium, we have US by far, Mexico, Japan, South Korea and Vietnam. All data is according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, or OEC World. Alex, let me come to you first for the first question. So what sort of picture do all these figures paint for you?
I think the tariff on steel and aluminum is an approach. I think it's a foreign policy tool to send in political signals to the American trade partners that the United States intended to do something that will curb the overwhelming imports to the United States and try to strengthen the American domestic production.
So you see this as a general strategy as opposed to maybe trying to target one country, that country being China?
I think we tried that before, or the United States had tried that before, but China was not hurt that much. Instead, there are other countries that are friendly to the United States that get hurt on this steel and aluminum imports.
Yeah, and of course, Stephen, Canada, Mexico and the EU, they've all condemned the latest 25% tariffs. They've vowed countermeasures, as Alex was saying. Do you sense that China is behind this? This is certainly the line that the New York Times is going with.
Well, I think China is fully aware of and have prepared for the upcoming tariffs on the Trump administration. But if you look at this closely, what is the tariff under Trump administration is all about? Is this something that is universal, or is this on the reciprocal basis, or is it targeted? And is tariff a negotiation tactic or a bargaining chip, or is something as an ultimate policy toward an objective? And that is something I think the whole world is trying to figure out.
Alex, so some of the analysts said that while China exports only tiny volumes of steel, the US says it's responsible for excess steel capacity, so it forces other countries to export more and leads, probably this is most important, leads to the transshipment of that Chinese steel through other countries, which then ends up in the US. And this way, China avoids tariffs and other trade restrictions. So can you see at all that this policy could be aimed at trying to overcome that sort of back route, given what we saw, especially the aluminium market, where China is the second largest exporter into the US, and then in terms of its own exports, the US is by far almost double the top destination.
Right. I think the market understands clearly that China exports into the United States is not, sometimes, in many occasions, is not direct export. It exports to the United States through the third parties. And even though China had, limited export of steel into the United States.
Directly, yeah.
Directly. But overall, when the tariff is imposed, China may directly get hurt less than those countries that serving as an interface or a third party and sell it into the United States. And that's why the across the board tariff on steel and aluminum sometimes hurt American friends and allies as well. So I agree with Steve that it's a policy tool. It's part of it, and the steel and the aluminum is just the beginning of a wider tariff tactics. It's not a strategy. It's a tactics to get everyone focused on the second Trump administration's policy.
Stephen, do you think that given the Japan's Nippon Steel investment into U.S. steel, that was something that I believe that Trump feels that he's brokered under his term. Do you think that there's an ambition by Trump to try to challenge China's dominance, especially in steel?
Oh, absolutely. I think the overcapacity of Chinese industries, including but not limited to steel and aluminum, have caused some problems globally. You quoted that Chinese export to U.S. on steel has dropped from to the number 10th, but then the aluminum continued to be big on the list. If you look at particular industry or sector, it doesn't seem to be on that specific negotiation, but I think China is trying to look into something more or something else, some geopolitical issues, as a way to negotiate with the United States. But I do believe that there is, President Trump seems to have certain appetite of having some sort of a negotiation with his counterpart in China.
Okay, well, let's get on to that now. The steel and aluminium tariffs come a week after President Trump imposed a 10% tariff on all imports from China. And in response, Beijing announced retaliatory tariffs. Both sides of tariffs have already come into effect. China is imposing 10 and 15% tariffs on liquefied natural gas, coal, farm machinery, crude oil and other products from the US. Beijing has also placed export controls on critical metals Beijing controls, such as tungsten. It has also launched an antitrust investigation to Alphabet, Google's parent company, and placed PVH, the parent company of Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, on its unreliables entities list. In response, Trump said he is in, quote, no rush to call Xi Jinping and describe the tariffs as a, quote, opening salvo, though he did warn that they could become very, very substantial if no agreement is made. Alex, both the US and China, they left only a few days between announcing these tariffs and then them coming into effect. So we have to assume that, both sides, not at the leader level, but below that, were negotiating. What's your understanding of perhaps why an agreement wasn't made?
First of all, given the very fact that the second Trump administration did it very fast to impose on the tariff on China, and China react also very quickly. That means that both sides had all expected, the tariff war long ago, and they had meetings, simulations, and tried to figure out and given all kinds of different lists with the different layers and perimeters. And so this is only package one yet.
So both sides accepted that they could essentially absorb these.
I think they are not in in the fighting trench yet, but they are showing the signaling to each other first. Secondly is that, China's announcement, if we look at the Chinese list, it's very targeted. All those, items that China imposed on tariff are the items that the United States desperately wanted to sell it to China. And so this kind of mutual retaliatory measures shows that they set the tone for a fairly long negotiation.
Right.
I believe that there were contact before the announcement, but I think no matter to what extent or any possible agreement that they might reach, that would be second stage, because first and foremost, they wanted to show the strength. They cannot be seen as weak. So no matter whether there were a possible deal, but the announcement would be very strong in the very beginning.
Right. So, Stephen, do you agree with that analysis that quickly imposing tariffs, both sides, or it's China in response to Trump's, that was needed in order to show strength, or do you believe that an effort was made, but perhaps Trump was asking for measures on fentanyl, on Ukraine, on Iran?
I do agree that this is just a starter. Remember that before Trump was elected, what did they say about the tariffs on China? 60% to 100%. Now you look at this, particular industries universally on 15%, and China particularly on 10%. And if you look at Chinese countermeasures, it's very targeted and specific. It's 10 to 15% in certain investigations. So that tells me that both sides leave room for further negotiations and possible trades on other issues. Issues such as I mentioned, geopolitical issues, not necessarily directly relating to the export controls on technologies or customs tariffs, but other big issues geopolitically in this part of the world and elsewhere. And whether or not that has got started, and what would be the cost or the trade-off, that remains to be seen. But I do believe that this is just the starter, and then there are more to come.
Right. And so, Alex, does that explain perhaps why it appears, on the surface at least, that Trump's tariff, or Trump has gone after his allies and neighbors, Mexico and Canada, pretty hard? And some people are asking, isn't a country like China, Russia, the target as opposed to allies?
I think that's a strategy that he chose. He would probably, it's not only the neighbors or NAFTA partners. I think it combines with other of his geopolitical narrative or policy, including Greenland, including Canada, including the Panama Canal. I think, to me, it's what I call offensive isolationism, that he shows very strong-handed to the Western Hemisphere or the Americas.
And what's the intention behind that?
I think he wanted to retreat or withdraw from global responsibility, but with that he combined a strengthening of the American sphere of influence in the Americas, and make the United States with a wider range of buffer, and in dealing with the rise of other powers. I think it signaled a tacit recognition of multipolar world. It also signaled that the United States may not want to be a only global dominating power. And that's a little bit off our topic today, but I think it's a combination of that.
Do you agree with that assessment, Stephen? That it no longer wants to be the world's biggest superpower? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's conditional and by stage. My understanding is that probably Donald Trump and his team, his advisors, wanted to do this first in order to make America great again. And before thinking of, they will redirect the country's direction, because continued commitment around the world will make America weaker and weaker. So that's why it's a kind of a retreat to the Americas and make that America stronger, and before thinking of the next.
Very quickly, I think under Trump's administration, the United States seems to continue to want to be the leader of the world as a superpower, but under the fair deal. So make America great again means that the partners and allies and other countries we have to pay the fair share. So that calculus or the equations will need to be recalculated and renegotiated.
But in terms of the position within the global system, you actually disagree with Alex on that.
I kind of think that the United States will continue to practice its power through strength by various different means. I think instead of sort of retreating back, as opposed to retreating back, I think it's under the fair deal and fair term. But if you look at Canada and Mexico, whether now is extended, right? The targeted tariffs of 25% get extended for one more month. But if you look at this very closely, on the day of announcing the extension, the director of White House National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett, declared that this is not a trade war, this is a drug war. I don't want to comment, and I don't know whether fentanyl and border control will be the right issues to be traded, whether this is equitable for the 25% across the border increasing tariffs on Canada and Mexico. But it seems to be that it is very clear that the United States does not want to enter into a trade war with at least Mexico and Canada. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Washington would not go that route with China or other targeted countries. But then also, it seems to be very clear that there is a clear rule of reciprocity. Reciprocity in terms of the tariffs. So we need to be very careful by way of looking at the tariffs that we imposed on a lot of countries, particularly on the United States, to see how that, to see whether we can map that out, whether or not this is reciprocal. If not, how are we going to adjust to make it more equitable and reciprocal in advance of the reciprocal tariff regime?
Okay. Let's take a look at the U.S. trade deficits. In this table, you can see from January to October 2024, not a full year, the U.S. trade deficit with China reached $245 billion, with China topping that chart. And from this data, next is Mexico, Vietnam, Ireland, and Germany, with Taiwan in sixth place. Alex, just carrying on, actually, from what we were discussing before, what do you think the message is to China when it sees, for example, Canada being assertively challenged in terms of tariffs, 25% blanket, then 25% on steel and aluminium? Canada is part of that. What message does China get from that?
Well, it's to me, it's very complicated because the Canada and Mexico, as the neighbors to the United States, they they are on the list, but they are not the top, trade surplus gain from the list.
Mexico is quite near the top.
Mexico, yes, but not Canada. And the real thing that probably Donald Trump want to address is the trade imbalance with China. And from our perspective, if we look the U.S.-Taiwan trade and through the lens of Donald Trump, Taiwan would have to sound ourselves an alarm,
right?
Because we are going to be targeted soon.
And that's why there is talk about importing more U.S. LNG
right.
Imports into Taiwan.
Yeah.
Stephen, is the message that's being sent to China that that there is a huge threat of much greater tariffs if Trump can essentially treat Canada like this, which is not something it's used to being, treated like? Is that a warning, in a sense, to China?
Absolutely. I think the direction is very clear. The pace remains to be seen. Why is that? Number one, Trump seems to leave room for negotiation in terms of the pacing, the increase of the tariffs on Chinese goods and imports. And number two, Trump is very carefully paving his way, not at the cost of the inflation and the stock market crash. So I think the pace is adjusted from time to time, but the direction is very clear. Now, China is preparing for that, but how so? How China would be able to, at one hand, try to cut the deal, make a deal with the United States, on the other hand, try to maintain its economic development without getting further deteriorated. I think that would be a huge challenge in 2025 for China. So I think the direction is so clear that both sides are prepared. I'm not sure it's ready to continue the negotiations entering into the second quarter of the year.
And Alex, Trump has ordered an investigation into China's compliance with his first round of the trade deal in his first term. But as we were saying, the debate over whether Trump is using this as a negotiation tactic, the threat of the tariffs, does that make it a weaker threat, knowing that it's actually a negotiating target?
Well,
tactic?
If we take the first Trump administration and the trading relationship and negotiations between the United States and China, the United States did not reach the goals that it originally set, and China was not hurt that much. We are not sure about the second Trump administration and how stronger. He is no longer a freshman, and he has a mandate that he never had or any other president had. So he can impose on his will in doing this during the time when China is suffering its own economic backfall. So there are still a lot of uncertainties. It's very hard to make a judgment about who's going to be the winner in the first round. But it seems to me that both sides are prepared. Both sides had a better sense to assess the opponent's measures, and the countermeasures are basically rely on the very strength of China's economic strength. And this is a true test that remains to be seen.
Stephen, very final words. So do you think, which way will it go? Reciprocal tariffs across the world, taking the world back to the 1930s? Or does Trump achieve his goals? He reduces the US trade deficit. He achieves his political foreign policy goals. Which one do you think it will get to?
I think it could very likely end up being a hybrid or a mix. On one hand, it's making efforts to reduce the deficits, trade deficits, but on the other hand, continuing to pound on other countries on the reciprocal basis in order to replace or substitute for the reduction of the income tax. But I think it's a moving target. It could be a mixture on the moving target on the ongoing basis in the days and months to come.
Right, yes, and he doesn't really actually have all that much time either.
Right.
So thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks, Alexander Huang and Stephen Tan.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
Game on! Taiwan's national team takes the field, ready to conquer the World Baseball Classic qualifiers. Meanwhile, CPBL spring training is in full swing, with teams gearing up for an electrifying season.
当然新目标就是希望自己的身体可以保持健康，这是非常重要的。
On the court, the stakes are higher than ever as basketball heads into its dramatic final stages.
抢投一个大号三分，林志杰接受。
Athletes across the island are prepared to give their all in 2025. This is the moment. Game on Taiwan.
三分炮！
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for Taiwan Plus.
Taiwan Plus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.